The following VETSIM video has been created by Aviation Pro for the P1 pilot rating course of the VETSIM Pilot Training Academy. Visit academy.vetsim.net for more information. In today's video we're going to take a look at the basics of communication on the VETSIM network. Now there are multiple ways to communicate on the VETSIM network, but the way you do that depends on whom you want to contact and also what you want to tell them. So let's first go to the most obvious way to communicate on the VETSIM network, and that's via the radios. Via the radios, you as a pilot communicates with the air traffic controller, and the air traffic controller on the other side communicates with you. The air traffic controller gives you instructions and clearances, and you should be able to comply with those instructions. Now of course you as a pilot are also allowed to ask questions via the radios to the air traffic controller, but communication on the radios should always be as short and briefly as possible. That's because of course the air traffic controller is very busy in guiding all the traffic and routes, so communication should be as brief as possible and no one is allowed to have a chit chat. No, everything should be very professional in order to let the traffic in the airspace be guided safely and also efficiently. Now communications via the radios always goes very fast. If you have listened to live ATC streams before, you might recall the speed at which the air traffic controllers and the pilots in the real world communicate. Of course, especially during peak hours, it might be very hard to understand what they are saying. Luckily on the VETSIM network it doesn't go always that fast because it's not really busy as in the real world. But of course you need some time in order to get used to the speed of communication via the radios. So listening to these live ATC streams helps a lot. And of course flying on the VETSIM network yourself and just go and experience it is always the best way in order to get used to it and to feel comfortable in the end. So now let's take a look at how to communicate with the air traffic controllers. How do you transmit on the frequency? It's very simple. As you have seen in the video about how to connect to the VETSIM network, all you have to do is, after you have established a connection with the VETSIM network, is tune in the frequency of an active air traffic controller. After you've done that, you will probably already hear some communication going on the frequency, and you should never interrupt a flight instruction. So if an air traffic controller, for example, gives a clearance to another aircraft, after he's done you should not transmit on the frequency because of course you expect an answer from the other pilot. So you should always wait for an instruction to be finished and then you can transmit to ask a question, to request your clearance or things like that. Now in order to transmit on the frequency for the very first time, you have to set a push to talk key with one of the main pilot clients. You can do that via FSIN. Via the settings you can set a push to talk key for your keyboard or your joystick. Or via Squawk Box you can set a push to talk key for your keyboard. Now it's always wise to set a push to talk key for your joystick because it allows you to transmit on the frequency while you're flying, so you don't have to take your hands off the throttles or your yoke. Now as I've said, you can set a push to talk button for the joystick via FSIN, but via Squawk Box it is a little bit more difficult. You have to do it via the flight simulator module FSUI PC. But there is an instruction on how to do this in the Squawk Box manual. So make sure you set a button on your joystick to transmit on the frequency, so it makes flying a lot easier. And after you've done that you can transmit on the frequency for the very first time. Now in this video we won't go through the communication procedures during the different phases of flight, but if you want to transmit for the first time anyways, one thing you can do is do a radio check. A radio check is probably one of the first transmissions you will make because it allows you to check your equipment, check your microphone and also your audio equipment. So welcome into this cockpit here at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. We're now going to do a little radio check. We're now live on the VETSIM network and let's take a look at how it goes. So we're going to tune in the delivery frequency, that's the first frequency, and Schiphol Delivery is also online on the VETSIM network right now, and let's see how to ask for radio check. Schiphol Delivery, good evening, KLM 7051 at gate Charlie 10, request radio check on frequency 121.907.
KLM 705, good evening, read 25.
So as you could hear, Schiphol Delivery reads us 5, and that's a scale out of 5, so 5 out of 5. If an air traffic controller reads you 3 out of 5 or lower, you should check your equipment and your microphone and make sure that everything is okay, because there might be something wrong because the air traffic controller can't really hear you well. So now you know how to communicate via the radios to the air traffic controllers. Let's take a look at a few more ways to communicate on the VETSIM network. Of course there's also a way to communicate on the VETSIM network when there is no ATC online. And in order to do that, there's a thing called Unicom. Unicom is just a frequency where pilots can communicate with each other via text. Now again, Unicom is not a chit-chat function, it's not a place to have a chat with a pilot, but just think of it as a real frequency where you tell what you are doing. This happens in the real world as well with uncontrolled airports, and by sending messages via text you can let other pilots in the area around you know what you are doing and where you are flying. Now the default frequency for Unicom is 122.8. The frequency might be different in other continents, so make sure you check that before you're going to fly. And when you tune in that frequency, you will receive text messages from pilots in the area around you, and you can also send text messages to the frequency in order to let other pilots know what you are doing. And again, keep those transmissions, those text transmissions, short and brief. It's not necessary to type whole long stretches of text. Just make sure that other pilots around you know what you're doing, and keep the communications short. So you are using Unicom when flying through uncontrolled airspace. But what if air traffic controllers suddenly appear, or you're entering uncontrolled airspace? What do you have to do? Well, basically you don't have to do anything. If the air traffic controller goes online or you're entering his airspace, what he will do is send you a contact me. A contact me is just a message to let you know that you should contact him on a certain frequency. So you don't have to worry about contacting him. He will send you a message when you have to do so. Now you will receive a contact me via the private message function of either Squawkbox or FSIN. And in the contact me you will find the frequency that you have to tune in, and then you contact that air traffic controller on this frequency. Now with the chat functions of either Squawkbox or FSIN, you can also chat with other pilots while in the air. Of course, this just can be regular talk and doesn't need to be very official. You can also set up a private voice channel via Squawkbox or FSIN, and this allows you to have contact with other pilots via voice. Of course, you could also set up your own TeamSpeak server and do it that way, but by setting up your own voice channel via one of the voice servers of VETSIM, you can easily communicate with other pilots when you're, for example, flying in formation or you're flying in a group flight. And of course, your own private voice channel allows you to chat with other pilots, but you can also go very professional, especially during those kind of formation flights. So these are the basic ways to communicate with air traffic controllers and other pilots on the VETSIM network. There's one more thing we have to discuss, and that's the transponder. The transponder actually communicates with the air traffic controller as well, because it sends them information about your aircraft, about your altitude, about your speed, and all the other information the air traffic controller needs from your aircraft. And the controller will see all this information on the data tag. The data tag is the little box next to you as an aircraft on the radar scope, and it contains all the information that the air traffic controller needs in order to guide you around through the virtual airspace safely. So welcome back into the cockpit of this Boeing 737, and we're now going to take a look at how the transponder works. Now the transponder might look different depending on the aircraft you are using, so make sure that you are aware of how the transponder works. Let's first take a look at those digits. This is the squawk code, and the squawk code is a code used by air traffic control in order to identify you as an aircraft. Now when asking for a clearance for your flight plan clearance before beginning your flight, the air traffic controllers will give you a squawk code, and this squawk code has to be entered in the transponder. This squawk code could be anything depending on where you're going to fly and in what region you are, but using the transponder you can enter the code right here. Now if there is no ATC online, you have to use the standard squawk code of VETSIM, and that is 2200. So whenever there is no ATC online and you are flying through uncontrolled airspace, use this squawk code in order to be able to be identified as an aircraft if air traffic control does show up. So this is the squawk code. There are multiple standard codes that are used during certain circumstances. There is of course the emergency squawk code, which is 7700. You should set this squawk code when you are in an emergency. Now, of course, on VETSIM it's not allowed to simulate an emergency unless you have clearance by ATC, if you have asked the air traffic controller is it okay to simulate an emergency, or if really is something wrong, if you are not deliberately simulating an emergency, you're gonna have to set this squawk code. Now the next squawk code that is more often used probably is the 7600. This is the squawk code that indicates that you have a radio failure. So if you can't get in contact with air traffic control, if your speakers or headset stops working, set this code so air traffic control knows that you have your radio failure, and then they can take care of that. Now this is a code that is used in the real world for hijack. This code is absolutely forbidden to use on the VETSIM network. So never use this code. It's just not smart to use it. It's not fun to use it. It's absolutely prohibited to simulate any form of hijacking on an airplane on the VETSIM network. And using this squawk code might result in a ban from the VETSIM network. So be careful with that. Now if you're flying VFR, there are also some standard squawk codes that you have to use. If you're flying VFR in Europe, the mostly common used standard squawk code is 7000. And if you're going to fly in the US VFR, the standard code is 1200. So there might be several standard codes depending on the flight operations, the type of flight, and depending on the situation, but most likely you will use the squawk code that is given by you by air traffic control when you are receiving your clearance. There are two more things regarding the transponder, and that's the mode. There's a standby mode and an active Charlie mode. The standby mode basically puts the transponder in a certain mode where it's not sending information to the air traffic controller, and you have to use this mode, the standby mode, on the ground. Now when you're going to take off and line up on the runway, you have to put the squawk mode into an active mode. This is known as mode Charlie. So this is the mode you have to put here in order to send your information to the air traffic controller. Now again, it depends on the flight simulator add-on if this is really going to work. There is a manual mode selector within the main pilot clients, FSIN and Squawkbox. So you can select mode standby or mode Charlie right there. But a lot of add-on airplanes these days also support Squawkbox and FSIN. So you can just use the knob within the airplane in order to set the squawk to the standby mode or to mode Charlie. So make sure you test that. Make sure that if you put your mode switch to the standby mode, that it definitely squawks standby, or when you put it to the active mode, that it definitely is in mode Charlie in Squawkbox and FSIN. So you have to check if that works. And then there's one more thing, the ident knob. Again, you can use this knob also manually with Squawkbox or FSIN, but you can also do it via the aircraft. And this switch will send an extra signal to the air traffic controller so that he can see you on the radar screen. The air traffic controller might ask this when you are in first contact with radar, and by pressing this button the air traffic control will see you blinking on the radar scope, and then he knows you as the identifying aircraft. So you have to press this button and then it will send that extra signal and you will be visible on the radar for the air traffic controller. So these are the basic things about the transponder, the squawk codes, the modes. We have mode standby and mode Charlie, and the ident button is also very important. So this is how the transponder works, and you now also know a bit more about communication on the VETSIM network, and you now also know how to do a radio check in order to check your equipment. So thanks for watching this video. In the next video we're going to take a look at how to communicate with the air traffic controllers during the departure. We're going to give you a step-by-step instruction from clearance until cruising level on how to communicate with air traffic controllers, so it will be a lot of fun. So we will see you on the next video, and good luck with flying on VETSIM.